This happened in my junior year of high school. One evening, my mother and stepfather had gone out to some event. Maybe it was an extended dinner or a concert, it's hard to remember. I had stayed at home to work on a paper that was due the next day. Yes, I was one of those kids who procrastinated until the last minute and spent the whole night working at the desk in my room. To give you a picture of my room, my desk faces a wall and sits next to a small window that's on the same wall, and from where I sit, my back faces my doorway. While I was working, I was wearing these great headphones that I had gotten for my birthday, the kind that are noise cancelling. My parents left the house around 6 p.m, and the whole time they were gone, I sat at my desk, blasting music through my headphones and writing my essay. Occasionally, I would take breaks and watch the rain and lightning outside my window. We lived in Houston at the time, and there was a big storm that night. Needless to say, I never left my desk. My parents returned around 11 p.m. At some point late in the evening, I had removed my headphones, so when my parents came home, I clearly heard the garage door open and my parents opened the door to the house. Seconds after I hear them enter, I hear my mother shout my name. "Adrian!" she screams. "What on earth happened in here?" Confused, I get out of my chair and start walking through the house to them. There's only a small hallway that separates my room from the living room. Due to my rush to figure out why my mother was yelling, I pay little attention to the hall and the house. After a few moments, I get to my parents. My mum looks livid. She's pointing at the carpet floor, yelling, "Was this you? Did you have friends over?" I look down. The carpet is ruined. It's covered in muddy footprints. I frantically explain to her that I have no idea how those got there, that I spent the whole night at my desk working on my paper. I watch as my mum's face goes from anger to confusion to fear. We realise that someone else must have entered the house. Quickly, we scan the footprints, trying to make sense of the situation. It only takes us a few moments to figure out where they start. Our back door, which we usually leave unlocked. Then we notice something else. The footprints started at the back door, but there were no footprints exiting the back door. We hear something pounding through our house. We hear the front door get torn open and then slam shut with a sharp thud. We all run to the garage and lock the door. My mum starts shouting at the police through the phone. "Please come quickly. Someone's broken into our house." And after what seemed like hours, the police finally arrived. An officer stays with us in the garage as his partner goes through the house, room by room. His partner tells us it's safe to go back in and that there's no one in the house. Then she asks us a question. She asks us whose room is down the hall to the left. My parents look at me and I tell the officer that it's mine. She asks us to follow her down the hall. As we go, It's easy to see that the footprints weave through my house from the back door. They go through the living room, through the small hallway, into my parents' room, and then turn around towards my room. They stop in my doorway. Then the officer points at my door, which I had left open the whole night. On it, in black Sharpie, was written the following: 8:47, I see you. 8:53, you forgot to lock the back door. 8:59, you seem focused. 9:24, turn around. 9:47, look at me. 10:15, look at me. 10:37, look at me. 10:49, look at me. For nearly 2 hours, someone stood in my doorway, watching me. To this day, I shudder to think about what would have happened if I had ever turned around and looked at them. When I was a teenager, my grandfather started suffering from dementia and came to live at our house for a few years. It was a nice time being with him, but it was also sad watching him decline like he did. The dementia went mostly as expected: strangely misplaced items and general confusion. But there was one really weird thing that my grandfather did that really disturbed me and my mum. One day, he started talking about Connie. Where did she go? He asked. We thought he was talking about my deceased grandmother, but her name was Anne. In fact, no one in our family was named Connie, so we figured it was just being confused. But he kept asking about Connie. I started to wonder if Connie was some woman that had been in his life that none of us had known about. The weird stuff started happening shortly after. He would randomly have his shoes already tied by seemingly no one. See, he had long ago lost his motor skills to do it himself, and when asked, he would, of course, name Connie. One day, he casually explained there would be a storm coming, and shortly after, one would come again. He said Connie told him there were lots of little things like this: furniture and doors moving around, mysterious footsteps at night, and always he would say it was Connie. My mum and I started to think of Connie as some sort of ghost or angel looking after him in his old age. Until one day, he was talking about Connie, and he grabbed my hand and suddenly looked at me with his eyes wide and his lip trembling. He looked terrified. "Where's Connie?" he asked, as usual. "She's not here," I said. "Quick, shut the door. Don't let her find me. Quick, before she gets me again." A creepy feeling came over me. "Who is Connie?" I asked for the millionth time. But he just put his hands over his face and started to rock back and forth, moaning. After that, we heard less about Connie. but mostly because we were too creeped out to keep asking about the weird noises and the random things he seemed to know. However, one night I woke up to the sound of footsteps and scratching. The footsteps were fast, like someone was running around the house. I hesitated to leave my room, scared of what I would find. I saw a figure down the hall, turning around the corner, and I almost stopped there and shut my bedroom door when I heard my grandfather's moaning and realised and the figure was him. "Grandpa?" I asked as I went over to him. He was scratching frantically at something. What is it?" I touched him on the shoulder and he turned around startled. On the table was a ripped out page from a magazine ad of a woman, and he had scribbled in pen all over her eyes. "Connie's eyes," he said. "Her eyes are missing. She's horrible. Why won't she leave me alone?" My mother and I had no real way of comforting my grandfather through these nightmares and terrors he was experiencing. The doctors said it was normal for him at this stage, and we all sensed that he had little time left. When he died a few months later in the hospital, the nurses told us that he called out Connie's name in his worst times. My mother and I don't really talk about it anymore, and we just figure that it was all a symptom of his dementia. But sometimes, when I hear weird sounds in the middle of the night, I think that maybe Connie is still with me, waiting to torment me with big gaping holes where her eyes should be. When I was little, my family had a weekend cottage in the mountains not far from Stowe, Vermont. Back then, it was still to some extent the back country and quite unspoiled. Our cottage was surrounded by woods, and there was a gravel road that formed a horseshoe where about 7 or 8 neighbouring cottages were. Oftentimes, there was nobody in those cottages, and we were pretty much alone for miles. Needless to say, nighttime was extremely dark. One summer night, we're all sitting on the orange shag carpeting and watching Star Trek or something, and someone knocks softly at the screen door. It was a woman, wearing a house dress and looking very sweaty and out of breath. I think I must have been about 7 years old, and had a brother slightly older at this time. My dad talks to her for a little while, and she explains that she needs a lift down to the village. My dad, the ever good Samaritan, says sure, no problem. Let me grab my keys. They both leave in my dad's Cutlass, leaving my mum, brother and I sitting still with the screen door open, watching TV on this warm but pitch black summer night. Meanwhile, my father is driving this woman down to the village, a good 30 minutes each way, and he begins to talk to her and pay closer attention to her. He notices that she is barefoot and her dress is all torn and muddy. She explains that her husband lives with her in a cabin in the woods, and that they had a huge fight, and that she had to run away through the woods since he intends to kill her. She has lost her shoes in the woods and run through brambles and branches in her panic to escape. Now, my dad is at least 30 minutes away from home, and he knows that the first house a murderous guy would encounter as he chased his wife through the woods would be our cottage, where it all still sitting around, completely oblivious, with every door and window wide open. Cell phones haven't even been dreamt of in this era, so he had no way to reach us. He drives the woman to some friend's house, urges her to call the cops, and motors back to the cottage, wondering if he's going to be greeted by our massacred corpses. It was a different era, I guess, because it never occurred to anyone to call the cops just in case. I still remember him getting home and calmly locking every door and sitting by the door, trying not to convey to us how scared he was. That is not even the creepiest part though. A couple of days later, my brother and I were looking around the outside of the cottage, and we noticed hand and face marks on the back window, where a tallish person had pressed his face against the glass. We also explored the woods over that summer, and actually found the woman's shoes stuck in the mud, as well as their utterly trash cabin. Someone had absolutely destroyed the place, breaking every glass and picture frame and throwing all their belongings out into the woods. That was one creepy place. We heard later that the woman had committed suicide. For years afterwards, my dad and I would often walk the dog out on the gravel road, and at the turn of the horseshoe that was closest to where these people's cabin was, we always got a really bad feeling. They were long gone, but the hairs would stick up on the back of my neck, and I would always feel watched and terrified. I always assumed my dad, a calm and rational guy if there ever was one, didn't feel scared. But years later, he confided in me that he always hated that spot and felt very bad vibes. Some kind of immense sense of foreboding where we walked by there. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. These 3 stories are 3 of the most classic horror stories found all around the internet. I must say that the first story even had me a bit shaken up while recording, as I decided to record at 3 AM while pitch black in my room and home alone. I know, a bit stupid on my part. But anyway, that's besides the point. And if you do have any stories you would like me to narrate, please send to the email on the screen. Also, leave a comment below, as I'd love to hear what you guys liked about the video, and maybe what I could improve in the next. And on that note, I wish you all a happy holiday, and remember to like, subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next video.